Hi, welcome. I'm Robin Lipsky, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ninth Circuit's Historical Society, the NJCHS. Don't even try. Nobody ever gets it right. It took me 4 years. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm going to do a quick infomercial about the Society, and then I'm going to speak briefly about this very important program. The mission of the NJCHS is to preserve and educate about the vibrant legal history of the West, and also more generally about the importance of an independent judiciary. Sometimes all of the aspects of our mission come together in the most wonderful ways. And for example, I highly recommend off of our website, we recently did a very moving video conversation between District of Hawaii judges Susan Okimawe, Leslie Kobayashi, and Jill Otaki about Judge Malway's book about the first 15 Asian American federal women judges. And that conversation was so beautifully led by our board member and extraordinary moderator, Claire Wamblack. So thank you to Claire for that. This program is another example of how all of what we do coalesces. The next issue of our journal is about water in the West. And we planned a full year of programming around the circuit on this topic. And this program is our inaugural program. So thank you so much all for being here for that. And it could not have been a more perfect choice to do, because the very essence of the NJCHS's goal is to share stories that educate and that inspire. In this series, in addition to our usual outstanding faculty of lawyers and academics, throughout the year, we'll also be teaming up with journalists and scientists to help us have a richer historical and cultural context for what we're learning about. We ardently hope that everyone will come away having learned more about the interplay of the legal and community relationships to this precious resource, and that some of you will come away inspired to write yourselves into the next part of the story. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you to Robin for the inspired choice to come and say, hey, can we talk about water law in Hawaii? You can imagine we here at the law school, when somebody asks that question, we say, yes. My name is Richard Wellsgrove. I'm the co-director of the environmental law program here at the law school and a member of the faculty. I want to do a short infomercial for the environmental law program with some late breaking, hot off the presses news, and share with you the environmental law program was just named to the Pre-Law Magazine's honor roll of environmental law programs across the country. We were given an A. I think that A grade reflects mostly the passion of the people who come to school here. It's our current students, and I'm delighted to see there are some students here in the room. And it's the folks that are graduates and who teach our students. So that's who we're meeting today. My job is only to introduce you to the panel and the substance of the panel very, very briefly. Robin's request, when she showed up on our doorstep and said, hey, we should do something together, was we'd like to talk about water law in Hawaii. And that topic is about that big. Yeah. And so we spent quite a lot of time together, Robin and I, mulling about how we can come up with a program that would be interesting for you, that would give you some CLE credit, and would create an excuse for practitioners and students to get together and talk story. So here's our plan. This is not a water law discussion in the way you probably thought it was when you walked in the door. In other words, we're not talking about riparian rights, not talking about Red Hill. We are taking a slightly different approach. And we're thinking about water in the larger sense. There are two types of water that I deal with on a regular basis, fresh water and salt water. And so our approach to this session was to invite two people working in those two realms. And rather than telling them what we wanted to hear, we just give them the floor and say, what are you working on? Make it interesting so that people show up. So that's our plan. And here's who's speaking today. I'll go from left to right. We have Drew Porter, or Andrew Porter, depends on whether you're his friend or not, who currently is a legal fellow, an ELP legal fellow, working with the coordinating group on alien pest species. He's our marine specialist today, and he's going to talk about stony coral tissue loss disease and some of the interesting legal quagmires that come up in that realm. On the right side, we have Ui, or Uilani, depending on whether or not you're her friend, Tanigawa Lam, who I think is the newest member of the faculty here at the law school. Ui is an assistant professor with the Huli Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. She's done some fascinating work on water governance issues with a community group through the Huli Clinic. She's going to talk about some of that work and also the principles that come out of that. The last piece of a good panel is to have a good moderator. And so rather than leaving it to one of us to muck it up, we brought in a professional. We have Savannah Harriman-Pote, who is the climate and energy reporter for Hawaii Public Radio. She's a storyteller by profession, and she's going to lead us through these interesting stories for the rest of this hour. Okay, with that, I will hand it off to Savannah. Thank you.
Okay, so happy to be here on this panel and to have this discussion with you. I have learned in my time as a journalist that it is imperative that you talk as little as possible. So I will quickly hand it over, but I just wanted to say, when we're considering the theme of water, there is no resource that is more important or more endangered that we have to address in the coming years. And what we're looking today to do is to explore the connectivity between systems that seem disparate, aquatic systems and freshwater systems, and see what we can learn about our models of management to move forward in a way that is more sustainable. So to set kind of a framework for this, to take a step back and inform the discussion we're going to have in the next hour or so, I'm going to hand it over to Huli, who will give us more understanding of the cultural context behind water law in Hawaii.
Mahalo. E uia kuna ia oi ai hea ko ia kane. Ai kahikina kala puka I hae hae. Ai ai laila ko ia kane. E uia kuna ia oi ai hea ko ia kane. Ai kaulana akala I ka pai o pua I ke kai e mai ana mani hoa ma ka mole mai ole hua ai laila ko ia kane. E uia kuna ia oi ai hea ko ia kane. Ai ke kuahiwi, ke kualono, I ke awawa, I ke kahawai. Ai laila ko ia kane. E uia kuna ia oi ai hea ko ia kane. Ai kai, I ka moana, I ke kualau, I ke a nue, I ka pūnoku, I ka ua koko, I ka a lewa. Ai laila ko ia kane. E uia kuna ia oi ai hea ko ia kane. Ai luna I ko ia kane, I ke a uli, I ke a ele, I ke a pano, I ke a polo hua mea kane lae. E uia kuna ia oi ai hea ko ia kane. Ai lalo, I ka wai honua, I ka wai hu, I ka wai kaua kane me kana roa. He wai puna, he wai e inu, he wai e mana, he wai e ola no, ea. Aloha mai kako. Aloha, my name is Huli, as Professor Wellsgrove already mentioned. It's really my honor to be here with you all today, and really just mahalo to the 9th Judicial Circuit Historical Society for giving us this opportunity, as well as my fellow panel members, and especially to the Environmental Law Program for making this happen. It really is my pleasure, and as Savannah said, we thought it would be appropriate that we start with a little cultural context. And so that mele that I performed is He Mele no Kane, and it tells us a couple of things. First, that Kane is the akua, the god, who has domain over freshwater here in Hawaii. There are a little footnotes and caveats to that, but that's an entire semester. But for Kanaka Maoli and for Native Hawaiians in particular, water is a body form, a kinolo of Kane, and so really a sacred form of one of our principal gods in our Kanaka Maoli pantheon. And two, that mele tells us where we can find water, fresh water. It's in the rainbows, it's in Kualeo, the squalls over the ocean, it's in the water that bubbles up from the earth, the streams, et cetera. And so you all might be asking, how does this relate to our conversation around law and water law in Hawaii? I'll start by saying that mele is a repository of knowledge, and for Kanaka Maoli, mele go beyond sort of entertainment as we generally like to think about it. It's a repository that embeds knowledge. And in Hawaii, Olelo Hawaii, our Hawaiian language and practices like this inform our worldview. And it tells us a lot about how to manage resources and how we move about in this world in relation to one another and our natural counterparts. And so this is not only in Hawaii, is not only important for our cultural practices, but as a matter of principle and for the reason we're all here tonight to talk about water law. And so here in Hawaii, both custom and tradition underpin many of Hawaii's laws and not just related to water. And to that end, I thought I'd share a bit more of cultural context as a foundation to our larger conversation. Again, entire semesters taught on this subject, so a brief overview of water law in Hawaii. I'll move on to the Kumulipo, which is helpful to understand our worldview and how we view water as a people. And so for Kanaka Maoli, we find our origins in this Kumulipo, and that's a cosmogonic chant that traces the birth of Kanaka Maoli to the beginning of time. Aina, including our natural resources, are born before humans in this genealogical chant. And so for everything Mauka in the uplands has a partner Ikai in the ocean. And although we have ties throughout Polynesia, the Kumulipo tells us that in the beginning there was darkness, and from that darkness came life. Po gave birth to Kumulipo and Po'ele, and through their union, the natural world was created. And so you see here the coral polyp, and that's Kumulipo and Po'ele's first child, which created the foundation for all life in the sea. All plants and animals were then born in sequential order. And Po had many children that comprise all aspects of the natural world, including the first human. And so this epic mele tells us a lot. It includes over 2,000 lines. And one additional lesson that we learned from this single mele is that our people intimately understood the relationship, the pilina between Aina and Kai, land and water. So for example, in lines 53 and 54, Hanau ka manawea no hoi kai, born as the manawea, some of us know it as Ogo. Ia e ke kalo manawea no hoi yuka, guarded by the manawea kalo, plants living on land. So it's really this idea of connectivity between Mauka to Makai, and that guides our decision making. So what are the big takeaways for this crash course in water law and cultural context? Our mele tell us a bunch of things. These two mele in particular, they tell us about the cultural and historical context and worldview that helps us understand and frame this conversation around water law in Hawaii. It tells us that Kanaka Maoli have a familiar relationship with Aina, including land and natural resources. And that's because the Kumulipo explains that all humans come from Akua, or gods, and that we are inextricably tied to and have kuleana, responsibility and rights to care for our natural and cultural resources. And because for those of you who have siblings, we are the younger siblings, we have that kuleana to care for our older sibling, which is land. These mele also teach us about connectivity and our biocultural resource management practices that have really enabled the life on these islands for centuries. And finally, why is it relevant for tonight? I think as we're beginning to understand water law in Hawaii is different, and for many reasons, these are some of them, and we have to look to cultural context, cultural and historical context, especially when we consider the historical and ongoing harms of colonization. And so because of that, and mindful of the fact that custom and tradition underpin our law in Hawaii, water law and work in our communities raise issues of justice. And so with that, I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I want to learn more from both Savannah and Drew, so I'll turn it back to Savannah.
Thank you for that overview and for the wonderful preview of what it must be like to be a student in your class. I want to keep you in the spotlight for just a moment in regards to what you said, specifically the sibling relationship between Kanaka and Aina, or people and land, that is the underpinning of all of the cultural context that we're going to discuss today. And I was hoping that you could bring that a little bit more into your work, in the work that you've done in Waioli Valley, to say how that sibling relationship looks on the day-to-day when it comes to stewardship of land, and what that can actually inform when it comes to policy that we're hoping to roll out when we consider land management.
Sure. And I'm just gonna make sure I don't go over time, but yeah, thank you for that question. So for a little bit of background, I was really fortunate to be a part of the clinical courses that our law school teaches. I promise this wasn't a planned plug for our clinical courses, but they really teach our students how to practice law on the ground and in our communities. And during our work there, we were able to partner with and work with the farmers of the Huli Valley Huli, who are really just small family farmers on the north side of Hawaii. And so for a little bit of background, they in 2018 suffered devastating flooding as a result of a rain bomb. And so in the span of 24 hours, they received a total of 50 inches of rain. And so that completely devastated the lo'ikalo, their equipment, their community really. And so in the wake of disaster recovery relief efforts, they were informed that the land that they had been stewarding for 5 to 6 generations, hundreds of years, was now state land, state conservation land. And so put it another way, they had been farming that area and stewarding those resources since before the state of Hawaii existed. And so that meant that they had to undertake a slew of legal and administrative hurdles. So during our time, long story short, during our time there, with over 4 attorneys, maybe over 35 students, 3,000 student pro bono hours, we helped them navigate those hurdles. A number of things, including the Chapter 343 process. We completed a cultural impact assessment, a final environmental assessment with a finding of no significant impact. I can go on and on, but really that work was transformative in thinking about what it means to be a servant of the land and have a relationship to the land. And so in many ways, it was transformative for me to understand that relationship and what that kuleana really looks like day to day, especially in the wake of sort of the climate crisis, as we're going to continue to find out. And so I wanted to just quickly highlight a couple really big takeaways in that work and examples I think we can look at as roadmaps as we continue to navigate our climate reality. And so the first was elevating this idea and reintroducing this really old biocultural resource management practice of what's called a kalana. And so I think a lot of us are used to talking about land as ahupua'a, and what the farmers did was reintroduce and explain that the way that their area had managed resources for years was really comprehensively and in a way that made sense for the folks and practices that lived there. And so they actually got the State of Hawaii Water Commission to look at that area and recognize that area as a kalana and more comprehensively look at water management in the area in a way that made sense. And so it helped that knowledge, that cultural knowledge and day-to-day knowledge helped inform decision makers to be able to navigate some of the more modern problems. The second big takeaway that I thought was really compelling was the fact that it was community driven. We thought that this was the first really significant step to putting our community members, who often know the place the best, right? They look at the flow at the bottom of the stream and they know that something is blocking the top of the stream. And so putting them in the driver's seat to make really informed decisions about the way that our resources are managed was something that was really transformative, I think, all around really. And so that said, my biggest takeaways, especially when thinking about how to integrate our cultural worldviews with the law, is that I think we need to be cognizant of the particular community and aina that we're working on. And so the physical aina and how the water flows, or how the way that water is managed on the north shore of Kauai is very different than the way water is managed in the kaha or dry lands of Kona. And so being mindful of the community and that particular aina, I think is an important step in not only effectuating these pilina and the relationships that we talk about in our mele and our practices, but also bringing the law to life on the ground and in our communities.
It's really empowering and heartening to read about Waioni Valley and the work that they've been able to do since 2018. But I think it's important to note that they are exceptional in terms of their connection to the land. This is a community that has had, I don't want to call it privilege, but has had the opportunity to steward land for decades and maintain those cultural connections in place, which created the basis for the work that they've been able to do in the last couple of years. Generally, we do not see that type of connectivity in our landscapes, and when we lose it, we also lose all of the cultural fabric that enriches people and could inform these management features in the future. That connectivity is, I think, what we're trying to highlight in this panel today. And I'm gonna do a 180 over to Drew, because in your work, connectivity is the big bad. Connectivity in a interconnected marine system makes us vulnerable to the introduction of particularly invasive species that put our systems in jeopardy. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do?
Yes, I'm Drew Porter. I work with the Coordinated Group on Alien Pest Species as the Aquatic Invasive Species Legal Fellow. And so just a little bit of background on the Coordinated Group on Alien Pest Species. It's an intergovernmental, interagency group that gets together quarterly. We have representatives from all over the federal government and representatives from state agencies. We have NGOs. We get together. We just try and find the little pukas in the regulations and the laws and the enforcement where aquatic invasive species might come through. Or actually, this group does all of the invasive species, both terrestrial and aquatic. But I just mostly focus on the aquatic invasive species. We also have a legal fellow that works on terrestrial invasive species. I work with the Hawaii Division of Aquatic Resources, most closely with the ballast water and hull fouling group. And so I work closely with them. And aquatic invasive species, we are one of the hotspots in the world for aquatic invasive species. We have around 417 established aquatic invasive species in the state. That's compared to 450 in the rest of the continental United States combined. The entire European continent has 546, so we're right up there. And we have twice as much as New Zealand or Australia. So, these are some vectors that we really need to get a hold of. And so one of the biggest vectors that I look at is shipborne vectors, and we call these incidental discharges or discharges incidental to the normal operation of the vessel. You can see there's lots of them. They don't all involve aquatic invasive species. So what I mostly look at is ballast water.
So sorry to interrupt you. I think that the folks,
Yeah. I mostly look at ballast water and hull husbandry, effluent, and biofoul. A lot of people don't know that much about the shipping industry, so I'm just going to give a little background. Ballast water, as a vessel's import, vessels are designed with a specific center of gravity. They need to stay at that gravity. And so if they're loading and unloading cargo, they're going to change weight. And so how do you accommodate for that? If it gets too light and the vessel's center of gravity gets too high, the vessel will roll over. If it gets too low, the vessel sinks. So to keep it at that perfect level, the vessels bring on ballast water to hold it down or make it lighter and to really hold trim the vessel to. So as it's discharging cargo, that center of gravity is going up, it's getting lighter. So you got to bring on hundreds of thousands of gallons to compensate for that. And as it's sucking up all this water, it's also sucking up all the biological organisms within that. And clearly that's a problem because this vessel is then just going to go across the ocean, and the whole time these organisms are in that ballast water. So if you get to the host port, start loading cargo, it's getting heavier, you're going to have to discharge ballast water while you're doing that. So if you don't run it through a ballast water management system or treat it somehow, all of that biological material is going to go overboard with the water. So that is why it's one of the major vectors. Another major vector is vessel biofouling. And biofouling is basically the biological material that starts growing on anything that you put in the water. If you put a piece of wood in the water, if you put a boat in the water, if you put a boat in the water, then you can see this becomes a major issue. Usually it doesn't get to this level very quickly. So, you put a material in the water, it almost immediately starts getting bacterial cells that, adhere to the surface. And then this, it just grows and grows. And if you let it go too far, then you get macrophyling. And so if you have the macrophyling species, they can spawn into the water. They can just fall off in a different port. There's all sorts of ways that this can spread. And if you think about some of the bigger ships, 400, 500 feet long, that's a whole lot of vessel hull area that can host things like this. So in water cleaning, if you have all this biological material growing on your hull, what do you do about it? Well, you have to clean all of that off. Because one, you get really bad gas mileage if you have all of this on your hull. It's just terrible. There's also safety issues because this can clog up like the raw water intake of your engine. And then if you're not getting raw water to your engine, it's going to overheat very quickly and you're stuck at sea. So you have to clean these things, but how do you do that in a safe way? That's a very long explanation, but they do it very simply. They have basically vacuum cleaners that connect to big scrub brushes like this guy's doing. And it just goes along the whole hull and then it filters all the water. And usually it's on a dock-based filter system. And then all of the effluent comes out, should be clean water without any biological organisms. So with all of that, if you look at the global shipping lanes, if you look at shipping traffic these days, it is out of control. So we have ships all over the oceans going absolutely everywhere. So it's transporting all of these organisms. So it's a major vector of aquatic invasive species. So the current regulatory framework, starting internationally, we have the International Maritime Organization under the UN. They do have a ballast water treaty, which is great. Unfortunately, the US decided not to sign on to it. I was majorly surprised there. So we are not a member of that. And we actually have our own regulations. So, and they're just enough different than the IMO regulations that it kind of causes a problem in international shipping. Because these ballast water management systems have to be certified. So if you're certified under the IMO, but that one is not also certified under US law, then you're not allowed it. So it can be a major issue. They're trying to figure that out with federal law currently. The current federal law, we have the Coast Guard and we have the EPA. Coast Guard looks at ballast water a lot, not so much vessel biofouling and other issues. The EPA is a much more robust document under the Vessel General Permit. And so realizing this and kind of the patchwork, the EPA and the US Coast Guard came into a memorandum of understanding where the US Coast Guard enforces the EPA Special General Permit. And to add to this patchwork, we have Hawaii state law. So we have DLNR is the lead agency for ballast water and hull fouling. And we do have ballast water regulations, which is good. They're well out of date, need to be updated, but we don't have any biofouling regulations. Luckily, in-water cleaning regulations are regulated by the Department of Transportation, and they don't allow any in-water cleaning of hulls based on the Department of Health's water quality standards. So it's a roundabout way of doing it, but there's no in-water cleaning technically allowed in Hawaii suburbs. So that brings us to the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act of 2018. This is something I've been working on for many years, and it's a reorganization of 312 of the Clean Water Act. It was passed in December of 2018, and kind of the big thing about VITA is that it preempts states from regulating and enacting or enforcing regulations of incidental discharges, and instead aims for like a more cohesive national standard. And but it does allow states to co-enforce regulations and enact and enforce regulations that are equal to or less stringent than the federal standards. So we can pass state regulations, but it can't be more stringent than the federal regulations. And this really turns the Clean Water Act completely on its head. Under the old system of the Clean Water Act, it acted as a floor. So states could have regulations that are at a minimum what the federal standards are, and they could have them as stringent as they want. This flips that around. Now it acts as a ceiling. So states can have regulations, but only as stringent as the federal regulations. So you can see how this would be kind of a clash and a bit of a problem. We did not agree with that. our senators generally did not either. So that's something we've been working on. But that's just the reality we're in these days. So there's a multi-step process under VITA. The EPA has 2 years to set regulations. And then after they're done setting their regulations and they're finalized, then the US Coast Guard has 2 years to set their regulations. The EPA has blown right by their congressionally mandated. They should have been done in December 2020. And they just told us that they're reproposing in the Federal Register later this year. And so there's going to be at least 2026 is probably the earliest we're going to see regulations. One thing to note is that the BGP remains the controlling regulations until these are finalized. And the state is not preempted from passing their own regulations until December 2026 or whenever the US Coast Guard gets finalized of their regulations. And that's basically what I do.
Savannah,
So
so apparently the fan in the back of the room is overtime with the humid conditions, so
Okay.
it's a little hard to hear.
gotcha. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good, because I have an audience question. Drew, thank you for that spiel. It sounds like you've given it more than once. I just want to ask the audience, is this the first time you're hearing of ballast water or biofouling? Show of hands. Yeah, that's me too, and I report on biodiversity. Given the lack of awareness that there is surrounding this issue and the amount of exposure we have based on it to some very, very serious invasive species, what are the main holes in the hull that we need to patch, for lack of a better pun, or blind spots that we have that we can address at the local level?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's a lot we can do. As I said, state law and regulations are not preempted until the US Coast Guard regulations are finalized under VITA, which at the earliest, we're looking at probably late 2026. So that being said, you know, legislatively, there's some kind of heavy lifts that we need to do. First, you know, Hawaii and Division of Aquatic Resources has a ballast water and hull fouling team. There's a lot of things they have to do. They have to go through ballast water reports that every ship that comes in has to send in. And you know what we really need to be doing is going out and testing the ballast water, because you know if you just say on a form, okay, I did my ballast water management system, okay, sure, but you know if you have the threat of maybe we're going to come test it, and you know DAR actually has a lab to do this, just not the capacity and the people and the funding. So the lab's there, but we don't have the people to do it. So really the first and main thing, you know, there's only 2 people in the ballast water and hull fouling team. And one of those people has other things they have to worry about. So we really have 1.5 people dedicated to this major issue. And that's kind of a problem. We also need to expand DAR's regulatory authority. Right now, there's only ballast water and hull fouling authority under chapter 187-36. So we need to expand that to, you know, when the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act comes online, we need to have the same authority that the Coast Guard has so that we can co-enforce with the Coast Guard. You know, if we're going out in the field and saying, hey, we're going to co-enforce with you, but we can only do the ballast water and hull fouling, you're going to have to do everything else. That's not a cohesive co-enforcement strategy. So we need to have the same regulatory authority as the Coast Guard does and expand that. We need to also, every 5 years, the Coast Guard is going to update their regulations. So on the state side, if we're co-enforcing, we need to have a mechanism that mirrors the federal regulations automatically, because if we don't, then we're going to have to go through the Chapter 91 process every 5 years and update. And so for that year and a half, we're going to have different regulations that we're co-enforcing, and that's just, it doesn't work, and it doesn't even make any sense to do that. It's a waste of state resources, really. So there's that, and then finally, I think an MOU with the military for research and eradication of aquatic invasive species in military waters, such as Pearl Harbor. We have this breaking aquatic invasive species issue with a soft coral called anomia that was found in Pearl Harbor. And the response is being bogged down because there's permitting issues, like, do they need permits from us? Do we need permits from them? Can we even go in there and help them eradicate it? And, you know, DoD, as much as they want to jump in and try and eradicate this, they still have their own red tape to go through. So these are wheels that turn relatively slowly. And so if we could work with them and coordinate with them and have a memorandum of understanding, then, you know, we could jump on things like this more quickly. And I think that would be a really great idea to move forward.
It's dangerous having a journalist as your moderator, because I'm like, see me after. There was a lot in what you just said, including named one particular invasive species that you're concerned about. I understand that there are over 400 invasive species that have been introduced, not just via biofouling and ballast water, but to our marine and aquatic systems generally. Is there a particular species or pathogen right now that is keeping you up at night?
Yes, yeah, that is among the host of all of them. In 2014, they found a new coral disease called stony coral tissue loss disease. It emerged off the coast of Miami-Dade County. And by the end of 2019, 2020, it had spread throughout the entire state of Florida. It has a mortality rate of around 98% for stony corals. So it completely, absolutely devastates corals. If it hits a coral colony, that coral colony is dead within weeks. So it just completely wipes it out. And we're not seeing a lot of resurgence of the coral after, you know, after it's dead. It's not like coral bleaching where sometimes it pops back, like it's just staying completely dead. So this has completely devastated the Caribbean. It's now found in, since it was found in 2014, it has spread through 26 different countries in the Caribbean and affects 34 different coral species. So it's a major issue. Luckily, it's still contained inside the Caribbean, but it moves quickly. And ballast water and hull fouling are really thought to be the major vectors. So that's why I was like, oh, okay, here we go. So with ballast water, they've found studies where it's moved against currents. It's moved in ways that there's no really other explanation than ballast water. And they've done studies that over time, there's actually a concentrating effect within ballast tanks. If it's sucked up, the causative agent is sucked up into a ballast water tank, it can multiply, it can get stronger over longer distances. So in Hawaii, that's a major ordeal. So if it's sitting there for 2 weeks or so, we have a problem on our hands. You know, and it moves quickly. So once it's introduced to an area via ballast water or whatever vector, it moves on the ocean currents and in sediment very, very quickly. As an example, when it was introduced into St. Thomas, it was found right outside of a harbor, and within the year, it had circled the entire island and destroyed much of their coral ecosystems. So it's very devastating. You know, we're watching Panama closely because if it's found in Panama and the route to the Pacific is the Panama Canal, we know that it's getting closer and it's on our doorstep. So that's something we're watching closely. And like this has the implications for Hawaii are huge. You know, if we lose a lot of our coral species and, you know, if we have reef collapse, we have a loss of fisheries, we have a loss of shoreline protection against storms and high surf. And, you know, it's going to cause greater erosion. And a lot of our tourism dollars actually spawn from, you know, issues relating to coral, you know, all of our boating tours, all of these tours, snorkeling tours, fishing tours. So it would be devastating for the economy of Hawaii, but even more devastating for the culture of Hawaii. So, you know, what are we really doing about that now? So it's not all doom and gloom, that there is major efforts to stop the spread of this. NOAA has a fantastic group that they've coalesced from all over the United States and internationally. It has the EPA in there, it has the US Coast Guard in there, it has universities in there, scientists from absolutely everywhere, all exchanging information and doing research. So there's a lot of research going into this, trying to find the causative agent, trying to figure out how to stop it, how to cure it. And we're not there yet, but the work is being done. On the state, we have a stony coral tissue loss disease emergency rule that we're working with the Attorney General's office on. Basically, in any vessel that comes from the Caribbean straight to Hawaii, where the Coast Guard actually set up a program to alert us to them, which is absolutely fantastic, the Coast Guard. So then hopefully we can run a risk matrix on that. And with this emergency rule, it would force them to give us a background on how they work with their hull fouling. Like, when is the last time that you cleaned your hull? When is the last time you hauled out your vessel and did a deep hull cleaning? Which is the last time you you repainted the hull coating on your anti-biological material hull coating on your vessel? You know, so we can run through a risk matrix and red flag any vessels that are coming through. So we can say, hey, you know, your vessel is way too hull fouled. We're gonna have to work something out before you come. We're also revising the 2008 Coral Disease Early Detection and Rapid Response Plan, and DAR recently got funding for a Rapid Response Coordinator position. So they're going to be coordinating all that, and this is for finicky coral tissue loss disease, as well as any new emerging coral diseases as well. So that just means we have the permitting in place, we have the materials in place, we have a game plan. So if it does show up in Hawaii, we can jump on it immediately, because, you know, if it spreads even a little bit, it gets out of control fast. So you have to be ready to go absolutely immediately to have any hope. But for any of these early detection or rapid response plans to work, it really, DAR needs eyes on the reef. You know, we need local, everybody out there who knows the reef better than the fishermen and the surfers and the spear fishermen. People that know their reef can actually see changes in the reef as it's occurring. DAR, I mean, they don't have the capacity to inspect every reef all the time. And so they might not catch if there's, oh, that looked different the other day when I was out here. So if you see something out there, you know, any kind of aquatic invasive species, give Division of Aquatic Resources a call. DAR, you know, the local knowledge is crucial for combating aquatic invasive species in our waters. So really that's a huge element in all of this.
I really appreciate that summary, and I'm sorry that I'm struggling such to get past the reality of the situation, which is we have 1.5 people monitoring hundreds of vessels that are coming in to our islands from all over the world, with not just one, but several deadly pathogens, stony coral tissue loss disease being at the top of the list. And this results from a system of interdependence where we rely on imports because we've undermined a landscape that once sustained us. We also have this tension in place between what we know we need here and what outside federal regulations want to impose upon our system. Uli, going back to the work that you've done, is there anything that this framework of restorative justice can offer to a situation like this that will make it just a little bit more bearable?
Yes.
Yes?
No pressure. Yeah, you know, as Drew is talking, like I see similarities in that something like the issue that you're talking about and something like climate change, the climate crisis, like huge issues that I think a ton of us are really concerned about, and where maybe we have 1.5 people working on it is not enough, right? So I see often that we're really, everyone's committed, everyone's on the same page and sees that this is a problem, but there are still roadblocks. So I was thinking a lot about how do we have better communication between state and federal agencies? How do we make it easier for farmers who clearly have significant environmental benefits and a host of other benefits? And then beef up our strategies for the making sure that there's no pukas in the patchwork, or forget the pun. But I think something that at least I'm have been looking at in really trying to articulate the value of something like integrating cultural practices into our decision making is what's known as the 4 values of restorative justice. And so when we're talking about communities like Hawaii, and really it's applicable for indigenous peoples across the globe, the 4 values of restorative justice are really helpful for solving huge problems and sort of analyzing the issues at hand in a way that still effectuates justice for at least here Hawaii's first people. So really quickly, whole semester dedicated to this course, to these values. four salient realms of restorative justice. The first is Mo'omeheo, or cultural integrity, Aina, lands and natural resources, Maliola, social determinants of health and wellness, and then four, Ea, and self-determination. So I think it's really helpful to thinking about complex problems and sorting through the ways in which it can and will impact an issue may impact a people. So I think it's something that we can continue to talk about, and something I think our decision makers would really benefit from generally.
Yeah, I don't want to sound too radical, but it does seem like the only surefire solution is to no longer import ships that would require us exposing ourselves to these types of invasive species. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but I do know that there is incredible work that is being done that is making us more resilient in terms of all of our landscapes. On the points that we've talked to today, I know that there are probably lots of things that have come up. So I think we want to turn it over to the audience for some questions with the remaining time that we have. If anyone's feeling a little down, I know we're also serving alcohol at this event. So that'll be available shortly. And I know all the panelists would also, I think we'd all love to continue to talk about this over like a tasty meal. But thank you everyone for coming to this and having this conversation with us. Question?
Yes. You said that.
Nicole, loud enough so that I can hear you.
Sorry. Mr. Porter, you said that the stony coral tissue loss disease was stopped, and it's just in Florida and the Caribbean. How did they stop it from getting to the rest of the US?
They have not stopped it. It's gone as high as coral go on the East Coast, and it's actually gone around the tip of Florida out towards Texas. And it's actually now been found recently at Flower Garden Banks Marine National Monument, which is 100 miles off the coast. So, you know, that's pretty devastating. In a lot of the meetings I had, we were really hoping that that would be spared, but unfortunately it's not. So yeah, it's the only thing that has stopped it is it runs out of coral to be going to. So yeah.
So does your agency have the authority to stop a ship from entering Honolulu Harbor?
We do not actually, which is also in the expanded authorities, would be great. But we would have to work with the Coast Guard on that. So that would be something. We work with the Coast Guard pretty closely. So it would be difficult under the current laws for us to stop a ship from coming to Honolulu Harbor. That's one of the things we're pressing for under the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, is somebody having the authority to be able to. So, you know, if you had a heavily fouled ship coming over, it's, you know, it's not great. It's a huge, just like a bomb coming across the ocean. But, you know, without the authority to stop it, it's very difficult. Right.
So the major culprits would be Matson, Carnival Cruise Lines.
We actually work with them very closely, and they are very, very good at cleaning their hulls and all of this. For one, as I said, they get better gas mileage and safety reasons, but two, they are really actually concerned about this issue and are genuinely concerned. I think our biggest concern is these one-off ships. You know, if you're coming in from somewhere far distance and we don't really know you, but you're bringing something into Hawaii, you know, maybe it's your first time. And so we're more concerned about the one-offs, the Matsons, and that's really not, we work with them closely. I wouldn't say that they're a major factor.
So I have a question for Professor Lum. The people in Waiole, was there an adverse possession claim discussed about them being on somebody's land for centuries?
Yeah. The short answer is no.
Okay.
No, they're really great people. I think in general, you know, they're small family farmers and they're just really overwhelmed by the prospects of having to go through these legal hurdles that are designed to make sure that in environments like the state conservation area is maintained in a way, in a Pono way. And so they were never mad, they were never adversarial about the process. I think they were just really overwhelmed and wanted to do right by the place and the resources. So, yeah.
Was it the 2018, the conservation land was imposed on these people, or was it it had always been in place, it just never been enforced?
Correct. They had not known, and the state had not known either, that either of them were sort of had interest there. So it wasn't until, you know, Kauai is such a small town. I think I was fortunate enough to go with my professor at the time, who wrote, and the weekend after the flooding, all these appointees and county appointees and officials came down to help clear the area to make sure that the water could flow down. And so it wasn't until those disaster recovery relief efforts that they realized that folks realized that it was state conservation land.
I just have one more question that has to do with federal disaster relief funds. Was that the impetus for this discussion?
This discussion here?
No, the clearing of the streams and protection of the waterways. in
Yeah,
Hawaii.
that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I wasn't involved that early on in the conversation. But that is a good question. Not
Oh,
sure.
well, thank you.
Yeah, may I jump in with a follow-up?
Yeah.
Moderator privilege sort of here. You used a word that I've never heard before, Ilana.
Yeah.
And then you said that the Water Commission declared this area Kalana. Can you tell us more about what that means and sort of legally what it meant as well?
Yeah, so you know, the State Water Commission manages water based on hydrologic boundary lines, generally speaking. And so what the Huli really promoted was the fact that this area was managed comprehensively and not really on those arbitrary lines. And so where the water came off of Waioli Stream through the Lo'ikala and it went back into Hanalei River and into the larger Hanalei Bay, they through research and through New Pepa and Olelo Hawaii resources, they were able to highlight that that's actually the way the place had been managed since time immemorial. And so it in many ways it helped the commission to really look at things more comprehensively, and the way that that community has managed the resource in a way that has been working. So it was kind of a big lift, and the community was really happy to be able to have that recognized on that level.
And does the water code sort of give that authority to the commission to decide on its own sort of regulatory boundaries now?
Yeah. And so we actually also worked on an IFSAR, we're just talking about acronyms, I can't remember it all.
In-stream flow standard?
Yes, assessment report, yes. And so that actually helped to bolster the argument that it was beneficial for the resource.
Excellent. Sorry, I took over there for a moment. We'll hand it back to the audience.
Yes.
This question for Drew, have you started to see any invasive species coming in on like the Pacific garbage patch or anything as a vector?
That is a vector for sure. It's one of the top vectors, but it's very hard to regulate. It's hard to, who are you gonna sue on that one? So
The plastics industry.
we're on to something. That's what these panels are for. So yes, that is a major vector. You know, there's also aquarium release is a major vector. And so there are people who look at that. It's just not my focus. But yeah, there are multiple vectors other than just the shipping industry.
I think that goes to show when the when the vector is difficult to regulate, there isn't necessarily a governing agency, or the cause of an invasive species is unknown, like with stony coral tissue loss disease, we don't actually know what exactly is causing it at this point. And that inhibits the regulations that we're able to put in place. So we have to do everything we possibly can in order to try to protect ourselves against it. That's when having a more comprehensive understanding of our ecosystem and its limitations becomes really, really valuable, because we don't know everything that we're going to fight, not only this next year, but in the decades to come, as the challenges get more and more complicated with climate change. That's my point. I want to turn it back to what you're saying about the delineation that the Water Commission made. The research that was required for the Water Commission to step up and create this delineation to protect the Waioli Valley landscape, was all the research that went into that done by community members?
They relied heavily on community members, as well as the cultural impact assessment and the research that was done there, as well as the final environmental assessment. And so as I think you bring up a great point that you know, oftentimes our regulatory agencies have 1.5 people working on huge issues. And if we can tap into the resources within our community, humans in our community with that knowledge, I think it really empowers both community as well as the agency. You know, if you have more fishermen on the ground making, or kilo, right? That's observation and taking note of what's happening and the changes that are happening. I think that really that can be a powerful model, not only for the agency, but also the community as well, to be able to partner with an agency like you folks.
Any other questions? Yeah.
That's great.
That's why you sat in the front.
Can't see very well. Sorry, this is also for Mr. Porter. How do you think the new, or do you think the new Deepwater UN treaty will impact the vectors coming from other faraway ports, like you said, or like vectors like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
That's.
Can you restate the question for the?
Sorry. So I guess the question was about the new UN Deepwater Treaty, which I am not super familiar with. So I don't know if I can speak on that and how that would affect the garbage patch. So good question, but thank you. Yeah, I will look into that. Sounds fast.
I have a question for Drew. I'm here to learn too. Are the ships and vessels that are coming generally pretty cooperative, or is it a struggle?
Generally very cooperative, yeah. So, and that's what I was saying, like, it's not massive. We're not trying to blame anybody. Like, it's these one-off ships that we're worried about. You know, so you have to regulate everybody to catch those one-off ships. You know? So it's generally not a big issue. Ships are very cooperative. They send in their ballast water reports. It gets reviewed. And if they don't send them in time, we'll send them, you know, like, hey, remember to send your ballast water reports. Okay, cool. So it's really the shipping industry is not actually that difficult in general.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like trying to find the silver lining.
I have a follow-up based on that question.
Yeah.
Oh.
My turn. No, I'm just wondering, Lee, if you can address, do you have some specific ideas for Drew based on your organizing and working with the farmers, how his organization would be able to similarly organize the fisher people and the surfers and everything? How does one reach out to them to let them know that we need the citizen science kind of help, and how the reporting could happen?
I love that, citizen science. That's a great question, and I by no means envy your job. But the thing that comes to mind when I hear your question is, I think so much of the success around our work, and I'm not trying to like toot our own horn, but I think there is success when there's pinina and relationships. And I think we're lucky in Hawaii to have the relationships with both one another. I mean, our circles are so small in Hawaii, but also with Aina and our natural resources. So I think I'm going to think of this as I go home, and it'll probably keep me up at night, but my immediate answer is I think it's important to have conversations like this, because holy smokes, I learned a lot. But also to build pinina within the community and in whatever way possible, to be able to have more folks on the ground and in the community, and yeah.
As a follow-up to that. Division of Aquatic Resources actually does have a program called Eyes of the Reef. And that is actually with, as we're revising this 2008 coral disease early detection rapid response plan, updating that, revising it, making sure it's getting out to the community and everybody knows about it. They know where to go, they know who to call if they see anything, they see coral diseases, if they see aquatic invasive species issues in general. Go to Eyes of the Reef, there's a website, and so it's a work in progress, but it's getting revamped. So hopefully that'll help a lot.
I think we can happily say, oh my goodness, we've learned a lot. And it's time for us to move on to the reception. So some quick thank yous. We can have a thank you for our panelists and our moderator. For the students in the room, both Professor Tanigawa alum and Professor Porter are going to be teaching classes next semester, so you might want to check the schedule, and now you know what you're in for. A thank you to Robin and the
Forget it.
NCJHS. No.
Thank you. Good thank you from me to the entire ELP, and because pretty much I really did rope the entire ELP into doing this program. So thanks to all of the amazing students. If any of you here are lawyers, please take a moment and introduce yourselves to the students. They work so hard. They're such wonderful people. I can guarantee they would be amazing employees because they're super dedicated and super smart and excellent time managers. So if those are the qualities you're looking for, make sure you talk to the students here. Thank you to all of you.
Perfect plug. Let's continue the conversation in the hallway.